The radar logs from August 14th, 1987, were never meant to be seen by anyone outside naval intelligence, and yet decades later they sit scanned, watermarked, and quietly buried in a forgotten archive, showing something that should not exist: a cargo vessel named MV Orpheus Line moving against gravity, against pressure, against reason, its signal not fading downward into the abyss, but climbing vertically through the water column, as if the ocean itself had decided to reverse its rules for exactly 9 minutes and 47 seconds, during which the ship's speed increased instead of slowed. The surrounding sonar returned hollow echoes, and the temperature sensors registered a sudden, localized drop so sharp it cracked 3 monitoring buoys clean in half. And the last recorded transmission from the bridge was not a distress call, but a single sentence spoken calmly, almost reverently, by Captain Elias Crow. The sea just opened its sky. At 02:11 hours, the Orpheus Line should have been invisible, a rusted, Panamanian-flagged cargo ship hauling industrial generators across the Atlantic. Nothing special, nothing valuable, nothing worth remembering. And yet the radar operators off the Azores noticed the blip behaving strangely, elongating, stretching upward on their screens like a smear of light pulled by unseen fingers, while the depth indicators contradicted one another, one insisting the vessel was sinking fast, another screaming that it was rising, climbing through layers of pressure that should have crushed it into a screaming metal coffin. And when they recalibrated the instruments, assuming malfunction, the readings became worse, not better, showing the ship briefly occupying multiple depths at once, a physical impossibility that caused one junior technician to vomit beside his console and another to begin laughing uncontrollably, repeating, "That's not how water works! That's not how water works!" until he had to be restrained. Out on the ocean, the crew of the Orpheus Line felt it before they understood it. A sudden weightlessness that made unsecured tools drift, coffee rise out of mugs in slow spirals, and the deck groan not from pressure, but from release, as if something massive had let go of them, and the sea around the hull went unnaturally still. No waves, no chop, no wind, just a glassy surface above and below, stretching in all directions, reflecting a pale, inverted light that didn't belong to the moon or the stars, because when the crew looked up through the water, they did not see darkness or bubbles or the familiar distortion of the surface. They saw something else entirely. A vast, luminous expanse that looked like a sky folded into the sea, layered with slow-moving shapes like clouds, but denser, heavier, alive. Boatswain Marco del Toro was the first to scream, pointing upward with shaking hands, insisting there were shapes moving in that false sky, massive silhouettes drifting just beyond visibility, their edges bending light, their movements slow and deliberate, like creatures that had never known urgency. And when the ship lurched again, not downward, but up, several crew members were thrown against railings that no longer felt like barriers, but like suggestions, and the ocean around them began to thin, not evaporate, but separate, layers peeling from one another like pages of a wet book, revealing impossible distances where depth should have been. The engines were still running, the gauges still functioned, the rules simply no longer applied. Captain Crow ordered a mayday, but the radio responded with a sound no one could identify. Not static, not interference, but a low, harmonic resonance that vibrated in their teeth and skulls, as if the transmission had been answered by something vast and distant that didn't speak in language, only in acknowledgement. And one by one, the crew began to feel watched, not from below, where danger always comes from the sea, but from above, from that opened sky inside the water, where the light thickened and bent inward like an iris focusing. At 02:18 hours, the Orpheus Line left every known depth category. The sea did not churn or explode. There was no violence, no cinematic chaos. Instead, the water parted around the hull with reverence, flowing upward past the ship in slow, luminous sheets, and gravity loosened its grip until men floated where they stood, boots barely touching metal, while the stars overhead vanished entirely, replaced by that vast inner sky that pulsed faintly, rhythmically, like a breathing lung. And when the ship crossed into it, because that is the only word that fits, the ocean closed beneath them without a sound. The Orpheus Line vanished from every instrument at 02:20. No debris surfaced, no oil slick formed, no distress beacon activated. The official report concluded catastrophic hull failure. It would have stayed that way if not for the life raft. 36 years later, a Portuguese fishing trawler operating far south of the Azores hauled in an object tangled in its nets, a standard-issue orange life raft, sun-bleached but intact, barnacle-free, with its emergency flare still sealed, its rations unopened, and inside sat a man wearing a faded Orpheus Line jacket, his skin unwrinkled, his eyes clear, his hands steady, as if he had stepped out of 1987 moments ago. And when the crew tried to speak to him, he looked at the sky with visible confusion and asked, "Why is it still closed?" Medical examinations found nothing wrong with him. No dehydration, no muscle atrophy, no cellular aging beyond what he should have had in 1987. His name was Jonah Pike, Junior Navigation Officer, presumed dead for decades. When interviewed, he answered every question politely, precisely, until they asked what happened to the ship, at which point he grew visibly unsettled and said the Orpheus Line didn't sink, didn't explode, didn't vanish, but ascended, carried upward by a current that did not belong to the ocean, into a place where time folded like water and the sea turned inside out, revealing a sky beneath the waves that was never meant to be seen, let alone entered. And before the interview could continue, he leaned forward and whispered something that caused the recording technician to stop the tape entirely. He said, "It's opening again." And far out in the Atlantic, modern radar systems began registering the same impossible readings.
Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more awesome videos. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.
Jonah Pike's first clear memory after the ascent was silence so complete it felt heavier than pressure, a silence that pressed against his ears without sound, a void where even his heartbeat seemed reluctant to exist. And when his eyes opened, he realized he was no longer floating in water, but suspended in something that behaved like liquid while denying every instinct he had ever learned about drowning, because he could breathe effortlessly, the air, or whatever it was, cool and faintly metallic, filling his lungs without resistance, without bubbles, without panic, as if the ocean had remembered how humans once breathed before fear was invented. The Orpheus Line hung around him like a fossil caught mid-motion, crew members frozen in drifting poses, faces slack with awe rather than terror, tools and loose papers hovering exactly where they had been when gravity loosened its grip. And beyond the hull stretched an endless expanse that looked like a night sky turned inside out, vast and luminous, layered with slow-moving currents of light that resembled clouds but flowed vertically instead of sideways, rising and falling in impossible directions, and Jonah realized with a creeping unease that there was no up here, no down, only direction chosen by intention, because when he thought about moving forward, the world responded, sliding around him like a living thing making space. The ship had not entered another place, it had entered another orientation of reality. Captain Crow was still on the bridge, hands gripping the rail, eyes reflecting that false sky. And when Jonah reached him, drifting more than walking, the captain spoke without turning, his voice calm in a way that felt rehearsed by something older than fear, saying that the ocean wasn't empty the way humans believed, that it had layers, not of depth, but of meaning, and that sometimes, under conditions no one had mapped, the sea aligned itself just enough to reveal what it had been holding above itself all along, like a mirror finally tilted at the correct angle. Time began to behave strangely almost immediately. Jonah noticed it first in the way thoughts stretched, seconds blooming into minutes, memories replaying themselves with microscopic clarity, each detail examined as if by an external observer. And when he looked back at the crew, some of them were still mid-blink, eyelashes frozen halfway down their eyes, while others had already begun to move again, speaking, gesturing, aging by fractions of years in moments. And it dawned on him that time here was not shared, it was personal, unfolding differently for each consciousness, like threads unraveling at different speeds. Then the shapes came closer. They were not creatures in the way humans understand life, not animals or monsters with teeth and eyes meant to intimidate, but vast presences that distorted the light around them, bending that inner sky as they passed, their outlines suggested rather than defined, like ideas too large to be fully imagined. And as they drifted near, Jonah felt memories, not his own, brushing against his thoughts, impressions of pressure before planets cooled, of oceans forming and reforming across epochs, of skies rising and falling like tides. And he understood with sudden, paralyzing clarity that these entities were not in the ocean's sky, they were the reason it existed. The Orpheus Line had not been noticed by accident. One of the crew began screaming then, a long, hollow sound that echoed without echo, because the moment one mind broke, time snapped back into partial alignment, and the ship lurched as gravity returned unevenly, pinning some men to the deck while others floated helplessly, and Captain Crow shouted orders that arrived seconds before he spoke them, his mouth lagging behind his intent, and Jonah felt a pull, gentle but absolute, guiding him away from the ship toward one of the luminous currents above. He resisted. The pull strengthened. The current was not water, not light, but permission, an opening that felt like being invited into a thought larger than oneself, and when Jonah crossed into it, the Orpheus Line fell away behind him, shrinking not in size, but in relevance, like a memory already being archived by something that did not care whether humans remembered it or not. He saw then what the ocean hid, a layered expanse of folded reality where seas flowed into skies, where atmospheres behaved like currents, where entire ecosystems existed without solid ground, drifting between pressure and vacuum, and within that impossible space were structures, not built, not grown, but stabilized, regions where the fabric of this inverted world held steady long enough for patterns to form. And in one of those regions, Jonah saw countless objects suspended like offerings, ships, aircraft, satellites, things that had vanished without explanation across centuries, all caught in different stages of decay or preservation, some ancient, some terrifyingly recent. Nothing was lost. Everything was kept. The entities did not speak, but Jonah understood their intent anyway. Humanity's oceans were thin places, membranes rather than barriers, and sometimes, when enough variables aligned, the membrane inverted, opening upward instead of downward, allowing matter to slip into the holding space where time could be bent, paused, or released back into the world altered, and the Orpheus Line had been one such release candidate, except something had gone wrong, or something had gone right too early. Jonah felt himself being examined, not physically, but conceptually, his memories sifted like data, his future branching and collapsing simultaneously. And in that instant, he realized why he would survive when the others would not. Not because he was chosen, but because he was unfinished, his timeline flexible enough to be folded without tearing, and the life raft appeared around him not as an object deployed, but as a compromise, a container shaped from expectation and probability, sealing him off as the current reversed. He fell. Not down, not up, out. When Jonah Pike re-entered the Atlantic decades later, no time had passed for him, but the ocean sealed behind him like an eye closing, and far above, in the world he returned to, humanity had filled the skies with machines, unaware that beneath them another sky waited patiently, layered under the sea, adjusting, aligning, preparing to open again, not for a single cargo ship this time, but for something far larger. And as Jonas sat in the life raft, staring at a sky that felt wrong, he whispered the truth no report would ever record. He said, "The ocean doesn't swallow ships, it lets them go." The first modern system to notice something was wrong did not belong to the military or a research institute or even a government that still believed it understood the ocean. It belonged to a commercial satellite array designed to track shipping lanes and insurance risk, an algorithm built to calculate loss, profit, disappearance, and probability. And at 0342 UTC on a night that should have been statistically unremarkable, that algorithm flagged a pattern it had never been trained to recognize. 3 vessels, separated by hundreds of miles, registering simultaneous depth inversions, their signals elongating upward through layers of data as if the ocean had developed altitude. At first, engineers assumed corruption, cosmic interference, a software fault. But when they scrubbed the raw telemetry, they found the same anomaly embedded cleanly in the signal itself. A vertical acceleration vector pointing away from the seafloor and toward the surface, yet exceeding it, continuing past zero depth into negative values that had no defined meaning in any maritime database. And when one junior analyst jokingly annotated the graph with the phrase "sinking upward," the room went silent because that exact phrase appeared unprompted in a declassified footnote from 1987 pulled by the system's cross-referencing protocol. That was when the military re-entered the conversation. Jonah Pike watched it unfold from a secured observation room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper, where officials spoke around him instead of to him, careful not to ask questions that might confirm what they were already afraid of. And as new radar overlays bloomed across the screens, modern, high-resolution, unforgiving in their clarity, Jonah felt the same pressure behind his eyes that he had felt inside the ocean's sky. A subtle tug, a reminder that whatever had released him had not forgotten. The anomalies were no longer isolated. They formed a corridor, a vertical alignment of disturbances stretching across thousands of square kilometers of open ocean, where temperature gradients folded inward, where sonar returned echoes too fast to be real, where buoys recorded brief moments of zero gravity followed by crushing spikes of pressure that left their housings twisted as if squeezed by hands the size of continents. And within this corridor, ships did not sink or float. They hesitated, as though waiting for permission. One of them received it. The container ship Haisheng 12 was transmitting routine telemetry when its captain reported a sudden calm so complete it erased the horizon, the sea flattening into a perfect mirror that reflected not the sky above, but something deeper, brighter, wrong. And before the transmission cut, the captain laughed softly and said, "It looks like the ocean remembered something." And then the ship's signal rose straight through the data stack, climbing past surface readings, past atmospheric models, until it simply stopped existing within the parameters of the system. No explosion, no debris. Insurance marked it as a total loss. Jonah closed his eyes and knew exactly where it had gone. The entities had begun to open lanes. What humanity called the ocean was behaving less like a body of water and more like a dynamic interface, adjusting its orientation in response to cumulative pressure, technological, environmental, cognitive, and every satellite, every sonar ping, every deep-sea cable vibrating with information had added strain to a membrane never meant to be mapped so aggressively, and now that membrane was flexing, revealing the layered reality beneath in controlled, deliberate openings that mirrored shipping routes with unsettling precision. The ocean was learning us. Military command wanted containment, isolation, silence. The entities wanted balance. Jonah tried to explain this, his words tumbling out with an urgency that made the officials exchange wary glances, telling them that the ocean's sky was not hostile, but corrective, that it functioned as a pressure release system for reality itself, siphoning excess matter, excess momentum, excess interference into a holding layer where time could be redistributed. But every sentence he spoke only confirmed their fear that he was compromised, altered, no longer fully aligned with the world he stood in. They stopped letting him speak. Outside, the ocean continued to adjust. Deep-sea drones sent into the corridor returned footage that could not be archived properly, images that bent compression algorithms to uselessness, showing water separating into vertical sheets, light traveling downward in slow columns like inverted sunbeams, and massive silhouettes drifting just beyond sensor range, their movements generating harmonic vibrations that caused instruments to resonate rather than record. And in one feed, just before the signal collapsed, a structure came into view, a suspended accumulation of ships, platforms, and debris, arranged not randomly, but symmetrically, as if organized by principles no human engineering discipline had named. It was not a graveyard, it was a harbor. The realization came too late. When the corridor widened, it did not discriminate between civilian and military targets, and a naval exercise monitoring the anomaly found its lead vessel caught in a moment of sudden buoyancy reversal. Sailors lifted off decks in weightless silence as the sea beneath them thinned and peeled upward, revealing that same luminous inner sky Jonah had seen decades earlier. And across multiple command centers, officers watched live feeds as the impossible happened. Again, not sinking, not exploding, but ascending, holes carried gently into the opened layer like offerings returned. Panic spread faster than understanding. Emergency protocols activated weapons systems that had nothing to aim at, sonar pulses that angered rather than deter, and the entities responded not with violence, but with correction, tightening the corridor, accelerating the ascent, pulling matter upward faster than human reaction times could process. And for the first time, satellites captured a clear image of the ocean sky fully opened, an expanse of layered light and drifting mass so vast it made Earth's atmosphere look like a thin afterthought. Jonah felt the pull again, stronger now, resonating in his bones. This time, it wasn't just him. Across the world, individuals with near-drowning experiences, deep-sea exposure histories, unexplained survivals began reporting the same sensation, a subtle alignment, a feeling of being recognized. And Jonah understood with a cold clarity that made his hands tremble that the entities were not just opening lanes for ships, they were preparing for exchange. Something had been kept too long. Something was about to be returned. And when the ocean opened its sky again, it would not be gentle. The first thing to rise back into the human world was not a ship. It was weather. Satellites detected it before eyes ever could. a pressure system forming beneath the ocean's surface, not rotating, not moving laterally, but stacking vertically, layers of atmosphere assembling underwater like an inverted storm, and as it climbed, the sea above it did not boil or erupt, but thinned, becoming translucent, revealing slow-moving bands of light spiraling upward through kilometers of depth. And meteorologists struggled to explain how clouds were forming where clouds could not exist, while naval instruments recorded gravity fluctuations so precise they resembled calibration rather than chaos. Jonah Pike stood on the deck of a research vessel positioned just outside the corridor, feeling the hum beneath his feet intensify into something almost musical, a low-frequency resonance that vibrated through bone and memory alike. And he knew, before any alarm sounded, that the holding layer had reached capacity, that balance had tipped, and that the entities had decided to release what they had been keeping because containment was never permanent, only delayed. The ocean sky opened fully at 06:03 UTC, not as a rupture, as a reversal. Water folded upward like a curtain drawn aside, revealing an expanse so vast it fractured perspective, a layered inner firmament where light behaved like a liquid and mass drifted with intentional slowness. And from that open sky, silhouettes began to descend, not falling, not crashing, but lowering with ceremonial precision. And the first object to emerge into open air was a ship humanity had lost in 1943, its steel pristine, its name still legible, engines cold but intact, crew stations occupied by uniforms that held no bodies, as if the people had been gently removed and archived elsewhere. Then more followed. Aircraft that had vanished mid-flight, their wings unmarred by corrosion. Submarines older than sonar theory, hulls gleaming as if launched yesterday. Satellites long dead, returning without re-entry burn, drifting downward like leaves. None of them aged. Time had not preserved them. Time had been paused. Panic gave way to awe, too quickly for comfort. Live broadcasts captured the impossible procession, millions watching as history rose from the sea. And in that moment of collective attention, the entities did something they had never done before. They allowed themselves to be seen, not fully, not directly, but enough. Massive presences shaping the light behind the descending objects, outlines bending reality into curves the human eye could barely reconcile. And every person watching felt the same inexplicable pressure behind their eyes, the same sudden understanding that the ocean was not empty, not passive, not conquered. It was a boundary layer. Jonah understood then what the exchange meant. Humanity had filled the surface world with noise, motion, interference, had stretched reality taut with satellites, cables, sonar, extraction. And the ocean sky had absorbed the excess, storing momentum, artifacts, trajectories that had nowhere else to go. And now, with the balance tipping too far, it was returning what it could no longer hold, not as punishment, not as warning, but as recalibration. The final object to descend was not mechanical. It was a shape. A vast, slow-forming silhouette condensing out of the inner sky, its presence dimming instruments, flattening waves, bending the horizon inward, and as it crossed the boundary into open air, every system monitoring it failed simultaneously, not from overload, but from irrelevance, because what emerged did not register as mass or energy or matter as humans defined it. It registered as context. Jonah dropped to his knees. Memories flooded him, visions he had not lived but had been allowed to glimpse decades ago, of oceans forming on young planets, of skies folding beneath pressure, of civilizations rising and vanishing without ever knowing why the sea sometimes took and sometimes returned. And he realized the entities were not guardians or predators or gods, but mechanisms, ancient regulatory intelligences embedded in planetary systems, ensuring that no single layer, land, sea, sky, accumulated too much dominance. The shape stabilized above the water, vast beyond scale, and the ocean sealed beneath it, the inner sky closing like an eyelid at rest. Silence followed. Then gravity returned fully. The world did not end, but it changed. In the weeks that followed, oceans behaved differently. Currents shifted subtly, tides adjusted by fractions that altered coastlines over years instead of days, and ships no longer vanished without explanation because the boundary had reasserted itself, reinforced by release rather than accumulation. And Jonah Pike was quietly discharged from observation, no longer necessary, his role complete, his timeline allowed to resume. On his final night by the sea, Jonah watched the horizon, feeling no pull, no recognition, only the familiar weight of time pressing forward again. And he whispered a truth no broadcast ever captured, no report ever recorded. The ocean doesn't steal, it balances. Far beneath the waves, the sky waited, closed, patient, watching. Not hostile, not benevolent, but prepared, knowing that one day, when humanity again pushed too hard against the membrane of the world, the sea would remember how to open upward, and next time, it might not return anything at all.
Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more awesome videos. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.